The moment you stayed faithful in silence, something shifted in the spiritual realm. Your endurance triggered resistance you never saw. And chosen one, if your chest feels tight right now, if your spirit leaned forward before your mind could explain why, it's because this moment wasn't random. You didn't scroll into this message by accident. Heaven arranged the timing. This message found you. Chosen one, there were nights when you questioned everything. Your calling, your strength, even your sanity. You kept moving while unseen eyes studied you. Not because you were loud, but because you refused to quit. While others walked away, you stayed. While doubt whispered, you kept breathing through the confusion. And in those quiet, unseen moments, the enemy began to panic because your persistence didn't make sense to them. They thought the pressure would break you. They expected fatigue to silence you. They assumed isolation would cause you to surrender your purpose. But they miscalculated one thing. They didn't know who was backing you. Every tear you wiped away in secret became evidence. Every step you took while unsure became a record in the spiritual realm. You weren't just surviving, you were being investigated. Chosen one, there is a reason resistance intensified right when you were exhausted. There is a reason distractions multiplied when you decided not to quit. Light exposes shadow, and your endurance became a threat. What you thought was delay was actually divine timing. What you thought was weakness was heaven refining your authority. You were never abandoned. You were being prepared. And chosen one, before we go deeper, pause for a moment, hit subscribe and comment, "I received this," if your spirit is already responding. Because this message is not entertainment. It is alignment. It is a spiritual step forward, and your response matters more than you realize. Hear this clearly. The enemy panicked not because you were perfect, but because you were consistent. You kept showing up when no applause followed. You kept believing when clarity hadn't arrived yet. That kind of faith disrupts darkness. That kind of obedience shifts realms. Now lean in, because what's coming next will explain why the battle felt personal, why the opposition felt strategic, and why the season you barely survived is about to make sense. A hidden truth is about to be revealed, and it has your name written all over it. Chosen one, let's begin here, because this is the part that confused you the most. There was a moment when you thought, "I'm trying to do better, so why does everything feel heavier?" You didn't turn away. You didn't give up. You didn't run back to old habits. And yet, the resistance suddenly increased. The pressure intensified. The silence grew louder. And you wondered, did I miss something? Did I do something wrong? But hear this gently and let it settle into your spirit. The resistance didn't rise because you were out of alignment. It rose because you finally were. There was a quiet decision inside you, one no one applauded, one you barely even announced to yourself. You chose endurance over escape. You chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. And in that moment, something shifted in the unseen. Not everything that reacts to you is visible. Chosen one. Some battles only reveal themselves when you start moving in the right direction. Think about it. If nothing valuable was awakening inside you, why would opposition suddenly pay attention? Why would patterns that once ignored you begin pushing back? Darkness doesn't waste energy on those who are stuck. Resistance only rises when progress threatens what once felt secure. Your movement forward disrupted something that depended on you staying small, tired, and uncertain. What felt like overwhelming pressure was not punishment, it was confirmation. Confirmation that your spirit matured. Confirmation that your obedience mattered. Confirmation that you crossed an invisible line where comfort was no longer an option, but purpose was. And yes, it felt unfair. Yes, it felt heavy. But ask yourself, why did it happen after you decided not to quit? Chosen one, opposition doesn't always roar. Sometimes it presses quietly, hoping you'll doubt yourself enough to turn back. It leans into your exhaustion, whispers into your confusion, and waits to see if you'll interpret resistance as failure. But what if this pressure wasn't a sign to stop, but a sign that something within you finally aligned with heaven's timing? Let me ask you, have you noticed that the resistance didn't come when you were unsure, but when you were steady? Not when you were questioning, but when you were consistent? That's not coincidence. That's exposure. Your endurance made you visible in the spiritual realm, and visibility always attracts reaction. So breathe here. Let your shoulders relax. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not being corrected. You're being confirmed. The resistance increased because your spirit stood up quietly and said, I'm not leaving. And something that benefited from your quitting realized you weren't going anywhere. Stay with me, chosen one, because once you understand why resistance increased, you'll finally stop blaming yourself and start recognizing the authority that was forming inside you all along. Chosen one, this is where the story turns gentle, but no less powerful. Because when we talk about your endurance, we're not talking about how strong you looked on the outside. We're talking about what you chose on the inside when no one was watching and nothing made sense. You didn't stay because you felt confident. You stayed because something deeper than emotion held you in place. And that changes everything. Your endurance was never about force. It was about trust. Trusting when clarity was missing. Trusting when results were delayed. Trusting when your prayers felt like they were echoing into silence. And that kind of trust is rare. Anyone can move forward when the path is lit, but you stayed when the road was dark. Let me ask you something, chosen one. If your calling wasn't real, would you still be here after everything you've survived? There were moments when quitting felt logical, reasonable, even necessary. Your mind offered exit plans. Your emotions begged for relief. And still, you remained, not loudly, not perfectly, but faithfully. That staying proved something powerful in the spiritual realm. This wasn't a phase for you. This wasn't passion without roots. This wasn't excitement that fades when tested. Your calling is anchored deeper than comfort. Heaven noticed that. Even when you didn't feel faithful, heaven marked your consistency. Even when your prayers felt weak, your presence spoke loudly. You showed up tired. You showed up unsure. You showed up with questions instead of answers. And every time you stayed, it became a living testimony, one written not in words, but in endurance. Chosen one, do you realize how many people leave when the cost becomes real? How many abandon purpose the moment it asks for patience? But you didn't, and that's how heaven knows you're safe with weight, safe with responsibility, safe with what's coming next, because endurance proves maturity. It proves depth. It proves that your faith isn't emotional. It's relational. What you endured refined you. It stripped away illusions and left behind something steady, something unshakable. You may not feel stronger, but you are more grounded. You may not feel louder, but you are more anchored. And that's the kind of person heaven entrusts with influence. Those who stay without needing reassurance every step of the way. So don't minimize your endurance. Don't dismiss the quiet seasons as wasted time. Ask yourself instead, what kind of calling requires this level of preparation? What kind of future needs someone who won't run when things get uncomfortable? Chosen one, your endurance didn't just prove you could survive hardship. It proved you were chosen for more than ease, more than convenience, more than comfort. And now that this truth is settling in, you're ready to understand what your faith did to the enemy. Because what confused them is the very thing that qualifies you for what's next. Chosen one, this is where something quietly powerful happened, so subtle you may not have noticed it at first. While you were simply trying to survive, something else was unfolding in the unseen. Your faith began to confuse the very forces that expected you to fall apart. They were watching closely, waiting for a reaction they could predict. Fear, anger, retreat, collapse. But that reaction never came. Instead, they found silence where there should have been panic, prayer where there should have been bitterness, steady steps where there should have been retreat, and that disrupted everything. You see, darkness depends on patterns. It anticipates behavior. It studies responses. It assumes that pressure will always produce the same result. When loss comes, people usually withdraw. When delays stretch on, people usually doubt. When opposition rises, people usually react emotionally. But you didn't follow the script they prepared for you. And when expectation breaks, control weakens. Let me ask you something, chosen one. Have you ever noticed how powerful it is when someone refuses to explain themselves? When they don't argue, don't panic, don't defend, just remain grounded? That's what your faith did. It moved without noise. It trusted without proof. It stayed without demanding answers. And faith without explanation unsettles darkness because it cannot be manipulated. The enemy planned for emotional reactions. They prepared for you to lash out, to spiral, to abandon your ground. But instead, they encountered something unfamiliar. Calm endurance, a quiet resolve, a spirit that didn't need to announce its strength to prove it had any. And that kind of faith doesn't give the enemy handles to grab onto. Chosen one, when you didn't respond the way they planned, confusion entered their camp. Strategies built on reaction began to collapse. Timelines failed, pressure lost its power. Because when fear doesn't show up, intimidation has nowhere to land. When panic doesn't rise, urgency loses its grip. And when you refuse to retreat, resistance starts exhausting itself. You may have thought your silence meant weakness, but silence can be authority. You may have thought your calm meant you weren't fighting, but calm is often the sign of someone who knows they're not alone. Your faith wasn't loud, but it was precise. It didn't rush, but it didn't stop either. And that balance confused everything working against you. Ask yourself, what kind of faith keeps walking without needing reassurance? What kind of trust doesn't demand immediate answers? That's not accidental faith, that's formed faith. And formed faith doesn't just endure, it disorients opposition. Chosen one, understand this. Confusion is not weakness in the spiritual realm. It is evidence that control has been lost. The enemy panicked not because you attacked, but because you didn't react. Your steady presence dismantled their expectations. And once their plan fell apart, all they could do was watch you keep moving. Stay with me. Because when confusion replaces control, it's often the sign that something is about to break open. And next, you'll understand why attacks tend to intensify right before breakthroughs. Why the pressure peaked when you were closer than you realize. Chosen one, breathe here, because this truth needs a calm place to land. There is a reason the attacks intensified when you were already tired. A reason the pressure felt heavier right when you thought you couldn't carry anymore. This wasn't random. This wasn't punishment. This was proximity. You were closer than you realized, and what you felt was not collapse. It was the sound of doors beginning to unlock. Attacks often rise right before breakthroughs because change creates exposure. When something is about to shift, what benefited from the old season reacts. Think about it. Nothing tries harder to stop you than what knows it's about to lose access. The resistance you felt wasn't a sign you were moving backward. It was evidence that something ahead of you was worth interrupting. Chosen one, the pressure wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to delay you. The timing was strategic. The wait arrived not when you were weak, but when you were aligned. Not when you were confused, but when you were committed. Opposition shows up when heaven has already authorized movement. And sometimes the final barrier makes the most noise because it knows it's the last one. Let me ask you, why did the attack come when you finally made peace with waiting? Why did the distraction increase when your focus became clearer? Why did doubt grow louder when your spirit grew quieter? That's not coincidence. That's interference. And interference only happens when momentum is real. Chosen one, pressure before breakthrough feels unfair because you expect relief, not resistance. But in the spiritual realm, transition is rarely silent. Old doors don't close quietly. New doors don't open without friction. And what you felt was the tension between who you've been and who you're becoming. That space is uncomfortable, but it's holy. The enemy often attacks hardest when they are running out of time. They sense change before you see it. They detect movement before you feel it. And so they apply pressure, hoping urgency will push you into fear. Fear will push you into reaction, and reaction will push you off course. But what if this pressure wasn't meant to stop you, only to test whether you'd turn back? Chosen one, you didn't. You stayed. You kept breathing through the wait. You kept walking even when your steps were slow. And that's how you know. This wasn't punishment. It was confirmation that breakthrough was within reach. Because attacks don't announce victory, they announce desperation. Ask yourself gently, what if the moment you almost quit was the moment right before release? What if the night that felt longest was guarding a morning you hadn't seen yet? What if resistance peaked because it had nowhere else to go? Hear this clearly. the pressure you felt was not a signal to retreat. It was a signal to remain steady. You were closer than you thought, closer than your emotions could measure, closer than your circumstances revealed. Stay with me, chosen one, because surviving the attack didn't just bring you closer to breakthrough, it gave you something even more powerful. It gave you authority. And next, you'll understand what you gained without even realizing it when you refused to quit. Chosen one, this is the part you likely overlooked, because real authority rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with noise or recognition. It forms quietly, slowly, in the unseen places where endurance replaces explanation. While you thought you were simply getting through another day, something deeper was being shaped inside you. You were changing in ways that couldn't be measured yet, but heaven was watching closely. Authority was not given to you in a single moment. It wasn't handed over with ceremony or confirmation. It was formed through endurance. Every time you chose not to quit, something settled into your spirit. Every time you stayed when leaving felt easier, your presence gained weight. Not emotional weight, but spiritual weight, the kind that can stand without needing to be loud. Chosen one, surviving quietly reshaped you. You learned how to listen instead of react. You learned how to pause instead of panic. You learned how to discern what deserves your energy and what doesn't. And discernment is one of the clearest signs of authority. When you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone, when you stop fighting battles that don't belong to you, that's not withdrawal, that's maturity. Let me ask you, have you noticed how your reactions change? How things that once triggered you no longer hold the same power? How you can sit with uncertainty without unraveling? That's not numbness, that's grounding. Authority begins when chaos no longer controls your inner world. By choosing not to quit, you developed a quiet confidence, not arrogance, not certainty about outcomes, but confidence in presence. Confidence that you are not alone. Confidence that even when you don't see the full picture, you are held within it. And that kind of confidence doesn't need applause to survive. Heaven trusts those who remain faithful without needing proof or recognition. Heaven entrusts weight to those who won't misuse it for attention. You stayed when no one was watching. You kept believing when there was no immediate reward. And that consistency told heaven something important. You are safe with responsibility, safe with influence, safe with what comes next. Chosen one, authority is not about control. It's about steadiness. It's the ability to remain rooted while things shift around you. It's the strength to wait without anxiety and move without fear. And you gain that without realizing it, because authority grows best when it's not rushed. Ask yourself, why do you feel more grounded now, even though the journey hasn't been easy? Why does your silence feel stronger than your old arguments? Why does peace feel deeper, even when answers are still forming? That's authority speaking quietly through you. You didn't just survive a season, you were shaped by it. And the authority you carry now will be necessary for what's ahead, because the next season won't require you to fight harder. It will require you to stand firm. Stay with me, chosen one, because now that you understand what you've gained, it's time to learn how to remain rooted in it, how to stand without striving and move forward without fear in the season unfolding right now. Chosen one, this is where everything begins to settle. Not because the journey is over, but because you are different now. Standing firm in this next season will not look like how you survived the last one. Before, you were learning how not to quit. Now you are learning how to remain grounded in who you've become. This season is not about striving, it's about standing. You don't need to force movement anymore. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. The work that shaped you has already been done in the quiet places. Standing firm now means resting in that truth. It means allowing awareness to replace fear and stillness to replace panic. When you are rooted, you don't rush. When you are secure, you don't react. Let me ask you something. Chosen one, have you noticed how urgency has begun to fade? How the pressure to fix everything isn't as loud as it used to be? That's not loss of passion, that's alignment. When you stand firm, you move with clarity instead of anxiety. You listen before you act. You wait without losing confidence. And that kind of posture changes everything. This next season will test not your endurance, but your discernment. You will be tempted to over-explain, overwork, or overextend, because old survival habits don't disappear overnight. But standing firm means trusting that you no longer need to fight every battle to stay positioned. Some things will resolve simply because you didn't interfere. Chosen one, you move forward now, not as someone trying to survive opposition, but as someone who understands it. The enemy already revealed their fear when they panicked at your persistence. You don't need to fear what has already shown you its weakness. You don't need to chase what's meant to meet you. Grounded people attract alignment without effort. Stillness is not stagnation. Stillness is control. It's the ability to stay present without anxiety pulling you ahead of your timing. And timing matters now more than ever, because what's coming requires precision, not pressure. It requires wisdom, not worry. Ask yourself gently, what would it look like to trust this season instead of bracing against it? What if your role now is not to push doors open, but to recognize which ones are already opening? What if standing firm is the most powerful move you could make? Chosen one, you are not entering this season unaware. You are entering it equipped, grounded, prepared. You don't fight forward, you walk forward, calm, clear, covered. And as you step into what's next, remember this: the enemy already showed their hand when you didn't quit. You don't need to fear what has already lost its advantage. Stay rooted, stay aware, and move forward with quiet confidence. Because this season isn't asking you to survive anymore. It's asking you to stand.